Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are completely skipping past the gleaming armor and the famous generals of the Roman legion. Instead, we're going to look at the gritty, practical reality of what actually sustained their massive operations across the ancient world. Because the truth is, the Roman war machine wasn't just built on courage or sharp swords. It was actually built on cold, hard calculation.
2,000 miles. Just let that sink in for a second. That is how far from home a Roman soldier could literally find themselves deployed. I really want you to picture that level of isolation. Imagine being stationed in the damp, freezing forests of Germania, or maybe the blistering, unyielding deserts of the East. You are months of travel away from the familiar streets of Rome. You're completely disconnected from the center of your world. And honestly, this massive distance establishes the ultimate logistical nightmare for any ancient military force.
So it brings up a massive question: how do you actually maintain an empire at that kind of distance? Because when you are that incredibly far from the capital, the traditional rules of governance completely break down. Figuring out exactly what held this sprawling, isolated machine together, when the famous generals and the emperors were absolutely nowhere in sight, well, it means we have to look far, far away from the glory of the battlefield.
Section 1. The cost of empire and sustaining the machine.
See, behind every heroic tale we read about in the history books is a highly rigid system. And that system was driven not just by raw physical strength, but by relentless logistics and incredibly strict psychological conditioning. The empire was quite literally held together by pure mathematics and, frankly, breaking down the human mind, only to rebuild it into a perfectly reliable, obedient tool for the state. You can't just hand a guy a shield and expect him to hold the line at the literal edge of the world. You have to fundamentally rewire how he thinks.
Moving on to Section 2. Citizen to career professional. A paradigm shift.
Now, achieving this required a massive historical and psychological shift that basically made Rome an unstoppable force. The older model, it relied on the citizen soldier. Picture a farmer who picks up a spear for a temporary summer campaign just to defend his immediate home and then happily returns to his fields. Rome completely replaced this with the career professional. This wasn't a seasonal gig anymore. It was a grueling, lifelong obligation to the line. You weren't a farmer. You were a permanent cog in the Roman military machine. And the psychological weight of knowing your entire existence is now tied to the legion, it's immense.
Which brings us to Section 3, Level 5, the Optio, the middle manager.
If you were a soldier on that long, grueling journey to becoming a Roman centurion, Level 5 was your ultimate proving ground, the Optio. They were the critical, absolutely essential, yet completely unglamorous gear in the machine. While the centurion led the charge from the front, scooping up all the glory, the Optios stood at the back of the formation with a heavy staff. They acted as the strict overseer of daily reality. The Optio was entirely responsible for managing the precise arithmetic of a century's supplies and the unyielding physical discipline of the men.
Section 4. The arithmetic of supplies, or survival math.
Every single day, the Optio had to perfectly balance the equations of survival. We are talking about the literal spreadsheet work of antiquity here. They were managing daily wheat rations and that sour wine known as Posca, just to ensure no one starves. They were overseeing constant armor maintenance because a broken sandal strap could literally cost a man his life on a forced march. They even organized the heavy, critical camp supplies like entrenching tools and palisade stakes. Bottom line, if the math was wrong, the men died. It's not glamorous at all, but this intense focus on the arithmetic of supplies is what literally kept the legion breathing.
Section 5. Discipline miles from home. Enforcing order.
But, managing food and armor is really only half the battle when your men are isolated on the absolute edge of the known world, completely surrounded by hostile territory and strange cultures. The Optio also had to enforce strict psychological discipline. He had to keep a remote century from completely falling apart from sheer terror, intense homesickness, or just utter exhaustion. That ironclad discipline, which was often maintained under the threat of severe corporal punishment, was pretty much the only barrier preventing a heavily armed group of desperate men from turning into a mutinous mob.
Section 6. The system of the testudo, the unified machine. Now, this rigid daily discipline wasn't just for surviving the miseries of camp life. It was the literal, practical foundation of their most famous combat tactics. First, you instill strict individual discipline through the relentless, watchful eye of the Optio. Second, you forge a mindset that accepts a lifelong obligation to the Legion's Eagle standard, completely stripping away the old civilian identity.
And it's only when those two psychological conditions are perfectly met that you can achieve step 3, forming the famous impenetrable shields of the testudo, or the tortoise formation. Just like the famous Spartan phalanx that it heavily mirrors, this is a real system. It's a massive machine of flesh and bone where the individual disappears entirely and only the unified, unbreakable unit remains.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Is the true cost of empire paid in the fleeting glory of battle, or is it really paid in the relentless daily arithmetic of the Optio? When we look back at the grand sweep of history, it's so easy to just focus on the emperors, the grand speeches, and those massive decisive victories. But the next time you think of Rome, don't just picture the generals. Picture the unglamorous middle managers enforcing grueling discipline and meticulously counting rations thousands of miles from home. Because those guys, they were the true, unsung engines that conquered the ancient world.